I actually think we're in the part of the cycle here where we're starting to ignore the good news. And we're so negative. And we're so emotionally wrapped up in everything that people forget that actually the world tends to keep moving forward, right? We are not in World War III by any measure. We are not anywhere near that, okay? And so I just think it's important for people to take a step back and take a really deep breath. There's a 17th century phrase that says, adversity makes for strange bedfellows. And I think what happens when you are in the middle of enormous adversity, you need to do whatever it takes to win, right? That's, I think, why Zelensky is so patriotic and viewed so heroically around the world. He's trying to defend his country and his people. I want to take the counter of, David, what you said. I actually think we are at war, but it's the most positive form of it in the sense that we are learning a different kind of warfare. Now, if you think about how we used to fight up until basically the Persian Gulf War, it was armaments and tanks. And then that evolved in the Middle East because we had to fight insurgents and, urban terrorism in many ways, right? I think this is a way in which we are learning that there's a different kind of warfare as well, which is fundamentally economic. And so, it may not take the same shape as drones and missiles and fire and guns and bullets, but I think you would be foolish to make the mistake that we are now not at economic war with Russia. And at the end of the day, the outcome is the same, which is either they survive or they don't survive. And everything we've done points to that we are willing to fight, and we are willing to put a lot of economic collateral and chips on the field in order to win this battle. So I think in that respect, we are kind of at a war.
Is this a nuclear level economic decoupling?
This is my point. It's like everybody has a historical framework where they want to go back to how the natural path of escalation works. And I think this is a very different form of escalation that we need to consider. And I think that this is the kind of warfare that may actually, be the way in which wars are fought in the future. You seize assets, you shut off access to supply routes, you make it impossible for anything to work. So, I'll give you a simple example. A form of warfare is what's happening right now in the sense that, for example, the Russian skies are completely clear. Not just because that, no external airlines will necessarily fly there, but because Boeing and Rolls-Royce and GE and Airbus basically pulled all of their support, all of their parts, right? We've gone to war with respect to their petroleum and LNG supplies. How? Not necessarily because we won't still stop payments, which we are still enabling, but because the actual refiners won't take the oil and the LNG, because they then would be subject to sanctions. The people who would ship that are no longer taking those payments or those barrels of oil into the marketplace because they can't get insured by international banks. So in all of these various ways, we are actually at war. And I think, maybe this is the way war should be fought in the future because it'll save thousands of lives in the more classic way of describing how lives are sacrificed for. In times of uncertainty, you actually want to be deploying. So, I announced, what was it, last week, I think it was?
The solar deal?
The solar deal, I put $228 million into this thing. And then I did another deal. I put $45 million into this thing you guys know about, which we haven't announced yet.
Yep.
So, but other than that, I've been literally white-knuckled. I don't like to open the stock app. There's no point.
Take some Dramamine before you open your Morgan Stanley account.
The stock app. And what's so funny is like my Bloomberg terminal, which is right beside me here at my desk, I have not logged into it.
Okay. Put it in a drawer. Unplug it. Yeah.
There's just no point. At the end of every week, I get a report, right? Kind of like our P&L. And I just look at the top line, like Connor always sends me the top line is like, and the last 8 weeks in a row, we've lost 1%, we've lost 2%, we've lost 3%. The time that it
Sachs
was
wishes he lost 1%.
I celebrated. I got so drunk that night. I was like, finally. I sent you guys this tweet from Morgan Housel, who is a great guy. And he has this fabulous tweet. He says, it says the shock cycle. And it's this beautiful cycle. Assume good news is permanent, oblivious to bad news. Then you ignore the bad news. Then you deny the bad news. Then you panic at the bad news. But then you accept the bad news. And then you ignore the good news. You deny the good news. You accept the good news. And then you assume the good news is permanent. That starts a cycle. If I could just put it out there, I don't know today if you guys saw non-farm payrolls, but we had a huge print in unemployment, like really great print, meaning like a lot of employers were able to find people to take jobs. It was a big number. But the interesting thing about it was we didn't see wage inflation tick up with it. And if I had to look at that, and if you actually look at a bunch of the earnings reports that have come out in the last 3 or 4 weeks, I actually think we're in the part of the cycle here where we're starting to ignore the good news. And we're so negative and we're so emotionally wrapped up in everything that people forget that actually the world tends to keep moving forward, right? We are not in World War III by any measure. We are not anywhere near that, okay? And so I just think it's important for people to take a step back and take a really deep breath. But I think that there's a lot of good news out there.
There's a ton of good news. And for people who don't know the term,
and we're ignoring
for people who don't know the term print, when we say there's a print, that is just a colloquialism in the financial markets that something was formatted for printing previously and you got good news. So an official report is sometimes called, we got a print.
I agree I think what's going on is there is some underlying good news, right? But there's this overhead of a small chance of something catastrophic happening. So how do you price that in, right? It's
like a one outer, right?
Yeah, exactly. But
this guy can hit quads. We're set over set. Yeah.
It's a one outer to the apocalypse, basically.
If that tiny probability thing happens, the game is over. So, why even worry?
So it doesn't matter.
It doesn't
matter.
Right?
Like it doesn't matter.
So
the cost of your house doesn't matter if there's a nuclear war.
That's right.
This is the thing that people underestimate is like that's not a risk that one should be hedging in any way financially. Right? At that point, the only thing that matters is the health and safety of your family and your friends, but really your immediate family, like, can you take care of them and make sure they're safe? And so, if you're an investor in the financial markets or you're building a company, managing for that externality, in my opinion, I'm not sure makes a ton of sense because I don't think you can manage to that externality.
You have no impact on it. It's something completely out of your control.
Scenario. Yeah. So I think you have to manage to the 99.999% of normalized outcomes. And I think right now there are some what's called green shoots, meaning like some positive news in the world and some positive data. By the way, the other thing that we saw today this week was Jerome Powell. And, the Jerome Powell testimony was also in the middle of massive amounts of bad news, some actually pretty decent good news, which was he said he's going to raise by 25 basis points in March. Everybody knew that, right? So we took the 50 basis pointer off the table. But then he was very clear that they were going to be data-driven. And in the language of the Federal Reserve, what that essentially means is like, we're going to be patient and wait and see. And if you couple it with what I said before, which is the economic cost of these economic sanctions towards Russia can be calculated. And I think that we have proven a willingness to print capital and money. And so if you put those two things together, I think there could be a real possibility that Powell becomes very accommodative. And, he and Biden and the entire administration come together with Europe and everybody else and say,